Welcome back to the Beyond the Hyphen podcast. I'm Mark Lee, your host, and today I'm delighted to be joined by John Sarbanes, former representative of Maryland's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. In this conversation, you'll hear Congressman Sarbanes and I discuss area from his career's work in the federal government to dangers facing democracy in today's political climate, and we'll also dive into his views on the turbulence of the current administration. Congressman Sarbanes has long served as a model representative for his colleagues in the U.S. House. His career and lasting impact has not only shaped Maryland's trajectory, but also that of the nation. Congressman Sarbanes, how are you?
I'm great, Mark. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You've had a long career in politics. 18 years representing the same district in Congress. You recently retired earlier this year. The people want to know what you've been up to. Can you break down some of the work you've been doing or what things have been looking like on a day-to-day?
Well, I appreciate the question, and it's still evolving. When I made the decision to leave, it's not like I had something concrete in place yet. My decision was based on the idea that 18 years was a good run. I thought I had made a contribution. But when I went into Congress back at the beginning, back in 2007, I didn't think it would be the last thing I did in my life as a kind of career thing. I thought there would be other opportunities. And so the decision to leave Congress was really a recognition that if I was going to start on some other things, I needed to get moving with it. You can't just keep looking at that clock and not making a decision. So in that sense, it was positive. The decision to leave was positive because it was to explore other things. So what are those other things? Well, there's some nonprofit boards that I'm active on, and that's certainly very rewarding because they're mission oriented. That's very in keeping with my longtime commitment to public service and community service. I'm looking at different opportunities to do some advising, provide kind of strategic advice to people based on what my experiences have been now over, nearly 35 years of a career, first in law, then in education, and then obviously in Congress. But I'm also exploring the potential to kind of take the work I did in Congress and pull it forward, but keep going, but in a different space and in a different way, because I still have that desire to serve and be involved and impactful in the community. So it's a project like anything. I'm 6 months into this next chapter and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's great. And it's fantastic when you have this blazing track record, you have this amazing state behind you. And like you said, it's clear you haven't stepped away from the public service sector. You're still deeply engaged. But I'm sure stepping back from the Hill does offer this new kind of opportunity to look in retrospect, this new perspective. As someone who worked at the intersection of law and politics, how would you say those legal trainings that you received influenced how you legislated those 18 years during Congress?
Yeah, that's a great question because you do look back over your training, your education, and assess whether the investments you made in certain things along the way were worthwhile. Did it actually enhance your professional career and so forth? Now, clearly, I had a professional career in the practice of law for about 20 years before I went into Congress. So having a law degree was certainly critical to that. But even in Congress, I felt like the training as a lawyer was something that made me very detail-oriented. And I'm somebody who likes to see, the draft on the paper as a way of beginning a process. So with my staff, I always had sort of the standard that when we were thinking of pursuing certain legislation, that we get a draft early and get it on paper so that we started to envision right out of the gate, what's this going to look like? Where do we have to make the tweaks? How do we go advocate for, different portions of it and so forth? And I think my legal training was very instrumental in bringing that kind of detail-oriented due diligence to the work. So you're not just kind of shooting from the hip,
Right.
but you're putting the project together in a very kind of focused and steady way. And that pays off, because then when you go out there to kind of take your legislation on the road, whether it's with your colleagues who you're trying to get to co-sponsor it, whether it's with the leadership in the House of Representatives who you hope will embrace it and move it forward, or whether it's explaining it to your constituents and showing them why it makes sense for their benefit. Having it sort of in a kind of detailed, focused form, I think was really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's super interesting. We've interviewed people from physicians to computer scientists to lawyers, including yourself, and it's always this unique sense of flexibility, this attention to detail that really ties in the sense of accountability as well. And we'll dive into that later in this interview. You champion a lot of issues during your time in Congress, from voter equity to campaign finance reform, healthcare, and a lot more. Out of all those bills that you sponsored, out of all those bills and initiatives that you worked together with colleagues on, was there one single bill or a few that you felt was most personal to you, or one that you're still proud of?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, my work on legislation relating to outdoor education and getting young people, in particular, into nature with all the benefits that offers in terms of career paths, improved proficiency on, tests, physical health, mental health. I mean, there's so many benefits the research shows us for getting kids, young people outdoors, all people of all ages, but certainly in formative years, to have people connected to nature. And I was instrumental in getting legislation that allowed funding to come from the U.S. Department of Education to support that. Now, who knows where the U.S. Department of Education is headed these days? We'll probably get back to that topic in a little while, but I was very proud of that effort. Something a lot of people don't know that I authored, which ended up being quite impactful, was the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which allows graduates who are carrying student debt to earn loan forgiveness if they go into public service for a period of 10 years. And so far, I think over 1 million individuals have benefited from that, to the tune of loan forgiveness exceeding like $60 billion.
Wow.
So it's had a huge positive impact, and it's allowed people who would otherwise have had to forego public service careers, teachers, nonprofit folks, firefighters, police, anybody who's employed with the government, they all qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And so the ability to pursue those careers was enhanced through that, and I was very proud of it. But the legislation I spent the most time on was the Freedom to Vote Act, which was formerly the For the People Act. And this was an attempt to pull together a remedy that could address all the different grievances that so many people have about our democracy, whether it's partisan gerrymandering, it's, ethical issues in all the various branches of government, whether it's ensuring access to the ballot box, which is so critical.
Yeah.
Or, to be honest, the issue that I think is most salient and has been for years now, and that is the corruption of big money in our politics. And how do we take that on? Because I think that's at the root of a lot of the cynicism that so many people have about politics these days.
Right.
And when people get cynical and frustrated, they get angry, and they reach for solutions sometimes that may not be the best, but feel good in the moment. And so I think addressing this feeling of being disconnected and disrespected by big money special interests is one of the number one priorities we have to tackle in our democracy. And so I spent a lot of time on that legislation. We almost got it done. We almost got it over the finish line. It was the number one commitment on the Democratic side of the aisle for 3 Congresses in a row. That's why it was H.R. 1. I'm hoping someday that the stars will realign and maybe we'll be back in a position to get it passed. And even though I'm not in Congress anymore, I'll certainly be working as hard as I can with a broad team to try to get that done.
Yeah, absolutely. In this ever shifting political climate, ever shifting Congress, even if we look at it now, we'll be moving into this topic of, okay, where do we see these trends in society that are going? You talked about cynicism that we see in our citizens. From the time you joined Congress to the time in your last term in Congress to now being out of Congress for about half a year or so, where have you seen the cynicism go? Is it, skyrocketing? Is it flatlining, especially in Maryland?
It's across the country. The intensity of the cynicism people feel varies, I guess, depending on where they are and what their experience is from day to day. But I think the polls show that the great majority of Americans do feel like the system, however you define that, is rigged against them, and that, big corporations and special interests and deep-pocketed campaign donors and insiders and lobbyists and all the rest of it have way, way too much influence over how policy gets made. And oftentimes that means that the priorities that everyday people want to see, the changes they want to see for their lives, get kind of pushed aside. And it's that special interest crowd that gets their way. And that's the perception. And to be very honest, it largely tracks the reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Those interests have a lot of power, and it can be difficult to take that on in a sustained way. So I think, Marylanders, when they look at kind of national politics, they probably share a lot of the same frustrations and cynicism that people generally do. And it's important to emphasize that this feeling cuts across the political spectrum. Whether you talk to Democrats or Republicans or independents, this sense that somebody else is calling the shots is really pervasive. Mm-hmm. And it either leads to anger or it leads to kind of resignation and checking out and apathy, because people say, why should I bother engaging? And in a sense, pretending that my vote and my voice matters in the democracy, when I know at the end of the day, these special interests are the ones that are going to get their way.
Right.
So I understand that. And I started trying to connect to that and understand it at a deeper level early on in my career. And I invited people to have that conversation with me. And that was what led me to a lot of the work I did on that issue. Because I realized, a lot of the good things we want to get done aren't happening because money's standing in the way. A lot of the hopes and aspirations of sort of everyday people out there about what change can happen in their lives are being smothered by their feeling that other people are calling the shots. And so I felt like if, for whatever time I was in Congress, I had to make it a priority to try to address that set of issues. And that ended up consuming a lot of my time, for sure.
Well, let me tell you, Congressman, that was time worth spent, time well spent. A lot of the current Congress people are holding this either on the back burner or on the front of their agendas, really making sure that our voters have a sense of agency, have a sense that their votes are worth something. And I totally understand what you mean by how we feel like our votes are being washed down by the special interests. And we can, obviously, the number one example is the relationship that President Trump had with his quote unquote billionaire moguls. Over the years, we've heard a lot of promises about sweeping, about fixing everything, from taxes to healthcare legislation to deficits. And I think you know where I'm going with this. The one big beautiful bill that was passed just a few weeks ago. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the passing of that bill? It was very, very narrow. We saw historic speeches, and what are its implications on our country?
Well, for starters, it adds $3 trillion to the federal debt. So it moves us in the wrong direction if you are concerned about the fiscal situation in the country. Now, there are times when you can justify borrowing money in a crisis. For example, we borrowed money to get through the pandemic. It was important to do that. It was important to help people. And so, in a sense, taking out a loan against the U.S. Treasury made sense under those circumstances. But what's very galling about the big, beautiful bill, even before we get to some of the details of it, was that the tax cuts that were put in place really only benefit the sort of, the top, 3-4% of the income earners out there and corporations. I think 83% of the benefits of that bill went to high-end earners and big corporations.
Yeah.
So if you think of it that way, what we're doing is we're borrowing $3 trillion to go give a tax cut to people that don't need a tax cut. It's not like we're borrowing it to go set up, universal family and medical leave, or to help people pay the cost of childcare, or to strengthen, community infrastructure, things like that. It's not being put into. Doesn't represent an investment in the public good and in the common good. And that's what's most jarring and offensive about it to me. But they couldn't close the gap completely. I mean, they couldn't borrow all the money to finance those tax cuts. So then they went and looked for things to cut. And so you have huge cuts to programs like Medicaid, huge cuts to the SNAP program, huge cuts to food banks, et cetera. All these programs that help people kind of manage in life went on the chopping block in order to help them underwrite these tax cuts for people. So that's why it was so offensive to me. And that's why it was so contentious, because obviously many, many Democrats, all Democrats in the end, who were opposing that, felt that it was just another example of the country going in the wrong direction. Now, the question is, how will the voters see it? And the task between now and next November, when we have the midterm elections, is to try to help people connect the dots. So there's accountability for this. And, the president and the Republican leadership in Congress have embraced it. There's no doubting who's responsible for this. Like, they are claiming ownership of it. So fine, let's go have the discussion about what this does and who it hurts and who it helps, and hopefully educate the public in a way that they can show up next November and make an informed judgment about, is this the kind of direction we want the country going in or not?
And it's pretty ironic when we look at this this one big beautiful bill. Is it really beautiful if it is, you know, like you said, taking the resources of those who really need it most and then uh, giving tax cuts to those tech billionaires? Looking at the political landscape,
I certainly don't think so. Uh,
and
but
I think
this is what the president does so well. He comes up with a catchphrase or a term of art, and he puts it on something, and then he just keeps repeating it
right.
and repeating it. And of course, in his version, in his philosophy, truth is what you believe. So if you can say it enough times, convince enough people that it's X, even if it's Y, if it's blue, even if it's green, whatever, then the ends justifies the means. And unfortunately, we live in an information ecosystem
Mhm.
that makes it a lot easier to manipulate what truth is, what the facts are, and it makes it hard for the average person to, and I feel for people out there to kind of sort out what's real and what's not real.
Mhm.
And that gets back to the challenge of communicating and sharing information with people in a responsible way, which in the political environment is something obviously Democrats are going to be working to do over the next year or so.
Right. And just think about the impact that it has not only on those regular, everyday workers, they're adults, but looking at the youth who are trying to step into the areas where they're passionate about in policy, in politics, and they see this, like you said, information driven, uh, convincing driven agenda. It's unbelievable. Uh, but people have wrapped their heads around. You can see on the news, people have wrapped their heads around what Trump has done to their families. They were previous Trump supporters. They voted for him. Uh, I want to know though, Congressman Sarbanes, if you were in Congress during this second Trump administration, what would you see as your top priority? What's that firewall that you think democracy needs most right now?
I think that the most important thing is to convey in a genuine way to voters, to constituents, that as their representative, you get up every morning and what you're focused on is what can be done to improve the quality of life. And that's a pretty straightforward equation. Like, just you start in the morning, like when people get out of bed and it's a family and they got to get their kids to school, do they feel good about where their kids are going? Is the transportation in place? um, can they give them a good breakfast before they walk out the door? I mean, even before your day is a couple hours old, uh, your frame of mind is being affected by those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Are you going to a job then? After you drop your kids or you put them on the bus to school, are you headed to a job that's paying you a living wage where you feel like you can support the family? Are you able to get there reasonably well because the road infrastructure or the mass transportation, public transportation system works well, or is it a hassle to get there? And so you can kind of go through the average day of a person out there and think about what are the things that government can do and should do to make it easier, not harder for that person to get through their day. If they have kids that aren't in school yet, is there a daycare center that they can drop them off at so they can go to work and feel confident that their kids are going to be okay? Can they afford it? Is it affordable to them? If they get sick, can they see a doctor without it bankrupting them? And can they see somebody that they trust? It's not rocket science but sometimes it can be hard to stay focused on those things because of all the other noise that's out there. So, to be honest, Mark, if I were in Congress now, I wouldn't be talking about Donald Trump. I would be talking about people out there who are struggling to get by and saying, here's what I want to do for you. And then people can make their decision, and I think that's the kind of choice we have to create for people in every election, but certainly next year is the first next opportunity to put choices in front of them. And I think if you have a chorus of people who make it clear, we're here and working every day to try to help you and your family make it in America and succeed and be able to access the American dream, even if on any given day we don't do that perfectly, or it's harder than it was yesterday, or it will be tomorrow. I think if that's conveyed as a genuine priority, people will appreciate that. And when I was in Congress, I used to say to my constituents, there's three things that I will promise you. Number one, that I will listen carefully to you. I won't just pay lip service. Like, I'm going to listen. Number two, I'm going to maintain my integrity in the job because you deserve that. And number three, I'm going to work as hard as I can. I would never promise them that I would agree with them all the time because that's not possible.
Yeah.
But I felt like if I stuck to those three basic principles, people would appreciate that. And for 9 terms, they sent me there. And I think that reflected that we did build a kind of trust out there among our constituents that even if I'm not perfect on any given day, or frankly on any day, I was kind of doing the best I could for their benefit.
Yeah, looking at, I love how you mentioned that there's not always this agreement between your constituents and you, but having that mindset of being that platform where all of the diverse people from these, however many demographics can really put their voice out there and trust you, which is very hard nowadays to trust your elected official, but to trust you to act as their boat to the other side of the river. And a big part of that is not just your congressman, it's your government agencies. Shifting gears a bit to that, they play such a huge role, right? The bureaucracy plays a huge role in implementing these policy agendas. What are your views on how the government agencies have been working in the current administration? Do you think that certain roles have to be reimagined, or is it more of a political will type situation?
So bureaucracies can become bureaucratic agencies that are designed to provide services to tens of millions of people. Over time, can become bureaucratic. That's inevitable. And therefore, I think from time to time, you have to kind of step back and shake things up a little bit. Disruption in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's what you do with disruption. Because sometimes disruption is just a way of kind of, shaking people up a little bit to think about how they're doing a job, how they're approaching things, etc. So I think there's always room, particularly the federal government, to come in and say, you know what, we could be doing this better. We need to push a little harder on this set of job responsibilities to make sure that there's more efficiency there, etc. if that's thought through and it's strategic and it's done carefully so that it really is advancing efficiency, then it can be a positive. The problem I have with the way Elon Musk pursued this was that it didn't look like disruption to me. It looked like sort of wholesale destruction of whole categories of functioning that these agencies had, with the result that you can end up doing a tremendous amount of damage. And if the thing you're damaging is something that's responsible for meeting the needs of millions of Americans, then that's a big problem. Whether it's the way you come in and root around Social Security or HHS or the CDC or the NIH, these are all the EPA. They're not perfect agencies, but on balance, what they do every day is they provide service or they offer sort of protection to the interests of millions of Americans. And I think the consequences of this kind of wholesale assault that we've seen will be very severe. It's already been severe. And in some cases, it will create lasting damage that'll be very difficult to recover from. What makes me the most upset, though, to be honest, Mark, is that the great majority of people in these federal jobs, in the federal workforce, are there because they want to serve the public. I mean, they're very mission driven. They care about what they do. They're proud of what they do. They want to make a difference. They believe, and from my interactions with my constituents, I think this is true, that the public basically appreciates what they do for them. If their work isn't caricatured, if they're not used as sort of a scapegoat or a punching bag, if the real story is being told about what they're trying to do to help people, that's appreciated out there in the broad public. And it makes me really upset when, these dedicated public servants, unsung heroes, people who don't get a lot of credit, are kind of thrown under the bus and demonized. It's just not fair. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to the work they do. It's not fair to the agencies, et cetera. So unfortunately, I think that's kind of been the approach of this administration. And as I say, I worry about in certain arenas in particular that the damage that that's causing will be very difficult to repair in the near term.
Let's that was that was an interesting perspective, and it's not difficult to say with confidence that we aren't heading in the right direction when it comes to you look at all these federal workers that are being fired, you look at all these programs that are being slashed, but I want to step away from Capitol Hill just for a little bit. The capacity in which you, Congressman Sarbanes, have done certain things, the capacity in which you are now doing certain things, how have your priorities shifted with trying to still contribute to this cause, but how has public service, how has that meaning changed for you in trying to still contribute to the cause that you once did in Congress?
It's a good question, and I think I have a pretty good answer. And that is that not being in Congress anymore, I find myself drawn much more to a kind of nonpartisan approach to strengthening our democracy. I've become much, because when you're in Congress and you're battling every day, it's easy to get pulled into more of a kind of partisan perspective. But at the end of the day, the challenge we face is to get decent people on both sides of the spectrum to figure out a way to do things together. Now, there are people that aren't so decent on both sides of the spectrum. And I'm not suggesting that I'm interested in spending a lot of time trying to convert them to something. But the fact of the matter is that there are good Americans out there of every political stripe who have a patriotism for the country, who want us to do well as a society. But they increasingly are finding themselves on either side of a great divide. And I was very affected by a comment recently from a friend of mine who's actually a Trump voter, because I was making the observation that, we're so divided as a country. Mm-hmm. And his comment was, he said, we may be divided, but he says, I don't think we're as divided as some people want us to think we are. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized that it is the case that there are powerful forces out there, political forces, financial interests, who are profiting from having us be divided and having us sort of at each other's throats. If you're a social media company, it's driving the algorithm, which is generating profits. If you're some kind of political interest, it may help you achieve a short-term victory, even if it's not the right solution for the community, etc. And if you look at it that way, what it suggests is that people who think they are divided and that they are enemies mm-hmm. or combatants, in fact, could look at each other and say, you know what? It's these forces over here that are trying to separate us. Maybe we should unite and sort of lean against those interests. And so I guess to come back to your question, I'm really drawn to where are the spaces and the places that people of diverse backgrounds, ethnically, racially, politically, ideologically, generationally, religiously, et cetera, are showing up for one reason or another. And is there a way to bring them into conversation that's around how do we move forward in a more united way? And that's part of what I'm exploring in terms of things that I could do next. So that's been the biggest shift for me, is getting out of an environment where the kind of political and partisan imperative is very intense.
Yeah.
Has allowed me to kind of get back to the ground level, which frankly is the place we need to start cultivating a different perspective if the people that go to Washington are going to end up behaving differently. I remember Steny Hoyer once told the story that he was asked, or one of his constituents at a town hall or something said, like, when are you guys going to start getting along in Washington? And his answer right away is, well, we'll start getting along when you start getting along, which was sort of an interesting answer because we are a representative democracy. So if people out in the country are divided and sort of in combat with one another, that's going to find its way into the places where these representatives are gathering to make laws and make policy. So we all have responsibility. Leaders and representatives have responsibility to examine themselves and how they conduct themselves. But, everyday citizens out there as well need to find their way back to some kind of decent interaction. And I think, Mark, the greatest obstacle to that is the accelerating influence that technology and social media and these sort of information platforms / entertainment platforms have now in our daily lives. And it's so hard to escape that in a way that lets you get back to just being human. That's the great challenge that we face.
Right. This polarized narrative that we see, where the citizens are confused who's shaping it. The representatives are a lot of them are confused on what they can necessarily do to, should I represent, this mindset of acting as the political mindset, where I kind of combine my own sense of awareness, sense of opinion, and then my citizens' opinions, or should I completely act as that delegate? It's a long story. It's a complicated one, but I think we are working towards fleshing that out. Now I want to discuss what a cornerstone of this podcast is, and that's our youth. That's our younger generation. In every conversation that I have, I always try to make sure to bring in the topic of youth, kind of wire that in. Youth today, they live in a world where information, like you said, moves so much more faster than legislation ever can. What are some words that you would say to our younger community out there, either in our audience or just our younger community out there, addressing the societal issues and struggles that many of our youth face?
Well, look, our youth of the future, that's not just a stock phrase, that's an observation, a fact. And what I say to young people is figure out what your voice is. Like, where does that come from? And particularly if you're going to have a political voice, small p political voice, the voice of a citizen, politis, the Greek word for citizen. It should come from passion that you have. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're these days, what I want to know most when I see a young person, standing on the steps of a state capitol with a sign or marching in a protest or whatever, is I want to know what's behind that. Like, how did you get there? Did you get there because you're part of a Facebook group and you just kind of got caught up in things and decided to be part of the bandwagon that day? Or did you get there because you volunteered last summer at a community health clinic or at a food bank, and you're really upset because you see these cuts coming down that are going to harm people that you actually interacted with? And so you're there because you had a passion and you were participating in your community, and now you want to have a voice. So I think that, and I'm encouraged because I see a lot of young people who are anchoring their voice, their vote, their purpose in their passion. Elijah Cummings used to talk about this all the time. Find your passion and make it your purpose. And I see a lot of that happening, and it gives me hope. And I just want to encourage more of that. Like, don't step up into something just because the person to your left and the person to your right is doing it.
Right.
Step into it because you got there through a journey about something you really care about. Mm-hmm. And if you do it that way, you can't go wrong. And frankly, if you do it that way, you're going to be a much more effective advocate. You're going to contribute better to your community, and you're going to have a meaningful impact mm-hmm. On the life of the community and the society. So that's kind of my perspective. And in particular, I say to people that are like interested in politics, because, I get that question.
Yeah.
Don't go into politics because you're, quote, interested in politics. Go into politics, whatever that means. And it doesn't have to mean running for elected office. There's other ways you can be, quote, political and participate.
Yeah.
Go into it because there's a reason, there's a passion, there's something that you want to see happen or get done. That's why you should be in that space. And if you're there for that reason, then most of the time, the result will be a good one. It'll be a positive one. Unfortunately, Mark, we also have a lot of people that step into politics now for performance reasons. Like it's just a bigger stage to perform on. And so you just get a lot of performers running around on the stage, and that's not particularly constructive. But I am encouraged because I do see every day young people who are finding their voice for reasons that are really impressive. And as I'm looking for ways to continue to kind of give back and be involved in the community, I'm very much leaning towards organizations and efforts and initiatives that are either youth-led or youth-serving, because that keeps me young and it keeps me energized and inspired.
Yeah.
And so if I'm finding that, and I am, then that to me is a positive sign and a hopeful sign.
That's great. And Congressman Sarbanes, you've led with a moral clarity. I think you've, left a legacy, especially in Maryland, among our educators, among our voters, among our current people serving in Congress, that you led with this integrity that not many people have nowadays. And you talked about our youth. You talked about leading with a passion, not going into politics because it sounds snazzy or because, you want to just follow the bandwagon. On that note, was there anyone that you would accredit much of the work that you did, much of the way you served and strive to be? Would you give, who's that person for you? Who's that someone that you looked up to?
Well, it wouldn't surprise you to hear that my father had a big impact on me. I mean, he obviously was in public life for many, many years. And his integrity and the example he set was something that, whether I was going to go into elected office or not, it was something I wanted to emulate. I felt motivated by. A few years back, I persuaded him to do an oral history, like a videotaped oral history, kind of like this. And we collected 20 hours of oral history, and it's going to be part of a collection at Hopkins University that'll eventually be available to the public and so forth. But, here's a guy who introduced the first article of impeachment against President Nixon. He was largely responsible for negotiating the Panama Canal Treaty. He was the author of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was about integrity in the corporate world. He did so many things sort of at the national level, big impact on the environment nationally and in Maryland, et cetera. But at the end of that oral history, and when he was asked to sort of talk about a couple of things he was most proud of, he told stories about constituent service, like helping a community on the Eastern Shore make sure that they got their postal service restored when it was being impacted. Mm-hmm. He never forgot where he came from. He was the son of Greek immigrants. He grew up working in a restaurant on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And when he would see a working person or an immigrant or something, he saw himself, he saw his own family in that, and he thought about the opportunities he was given
Yeah.
to access that and live that American dream. And he was all about just giving it back to the next generation. So that kind of humility and integrity in terms of staying connected to like why you should do this and why you should be there was very inspiring to me. And I tried my best to carry forward that kind of legacy. And look, he had many, many other peers who did the same thing. And if there's a resilience to our country, and I think there is, even in moments of great challenge, and we're certainly going through one of those moments now, that resilience comes from the sort of endless, countless number of small contributions that ordinary people are making every single day. And so as a public servant, if you appreciate and understand that and keep sort of those many contributions that people are making as your guiding light, then I think you'll do the job well. And I try to do it that way. Certainly that's how he did it. And many others that I've admired over the years also had that same philosophy.
Well, yeah, that was well said. I think you measured well how not only you, Congressman Sarbanes, but many other people have been inspired by your father, Paul. He did send national waves on behalf of Maryland, on behalf of the people, and so I wanna emphasize that. Before we wrap up, Congressman Sarbanes, if we think about the future, a decade from now, maybe 2 decades, if we met again, let's say in 10 years, what's one thing that you would hope has changed about the way that we practice democracy, and what's one thing that you hope has not changed?
That's a good question. I hope, and I don't know how we do this. I hope we will have found some ways. They may not be the dominant way, but some ways of getting hold of information and exchanging information and views with each other. That's kind of anchored in fact and anchored in truth. It just seems so difficult right now to find that ballast. And I think we need to start being super creative about how we can just talk to each other as humans again, and at least for part of our day, put some of this technology aside and remind ourselves of that humanity. So that's something I would love to see change. And we haven't talked about AI yet, but I'm very apprehensive about where that's taking us for all the things that it can provide in a positive way going forward. I worry that there's 10 times more things that are insidious about it. So we have to be very careful there. So anyway, I'd like to see us, I'd like in 10 years, if there were some examples of how we've been able to resist or get around this misinformation and disinformation that is this kind of besieging us. That would be a positive. In terms of things that hopefully won't have changed, one of the things about America, which is quite distinctive, and Tocqueville made this observation in a formal way, and others certainly have observed it as well. Is this desire by people to kind of join things and have these community-based associations that don't have anything to do with government or party. It's just about sort of how you're looking after your own community and keeping it strong.
Right.
And that's gotten a little frayed over the last few years, but there's still a lot of that civic connective tissue in place and that civic infrastructure in place. And so I'd like to see it still there and working, and I'd love to see it thriving and maybe finding a new opportunity to offer, sort of empowerment to people out there in their communities. And I see that still as I move around the state, as I move around my own community. There's still that impulse that Americans have. And if they can still be holding on to it one way or the other in 10 years and possibly building on it as well, then that would be a positive thing from my standpoint.
And we're in the same boat, and absolutely would. From someone in the Generation Z, I want to see more rapport being built among people outside of politics, for sure. But Congressman Sarbanes, it was an amazing conversation. Thank you for joining us today and for your decades of hard work and service. This conversation was really informative, and I just appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, Mark, I appreciate the invitation. I thank you for putting this podcast together, and you clearly are somebody who's hopeful about the future, because you wouldn't be doing this if you weren't. So kudos to you for the effort, and look forward to seeing where you are in 10 years. So I'll have my eye out for that as well.
Thank you.
All right. All the best.